We have another tropical storm blowing over Texas. When I look outside, it's gray, it's non-stop raining, and this reminds me very much of my hometown Hamburg, where we have kind of the same weather most of the time and just, some degrees colder. And so I'm getting a little bit homesick here, and I decided to bake some Franzbrötchen. And Franzbrötchen, they are sweet rolls with cinnamon and sugar, and probably somewhat related to the cinnamon rolls here in America, but still very different. So stay tuned and watch my special intro music video today. The name of the Franzbrötchen is somewhat confusing because a lot of people think it comes from someone who was called Franz and invented these rolls, but it's not correct. Franzbrötchen were invented as rolls for the French soldiers in Hamburg-Altona, which is a part of Hamburg, and the French soldiers were there to occupy Hamburg, where they invaded Germany with Napoleon, and so they demanded to have like the same things that they have in France, like croissants and stuff like that. And so yeah, he baked that for them, and up to this date Franzbrötchen are kind of sacred in Hamburg, and we absolutely love these, and they spread now just recently to other towns too, but they're mostly something you would always get in Hamburg in every bakery. And just to explain the name again, so Franz is the short form for Franzosen, and Franzosen is the German word for French or Frenchman. So before I can bake my Franzbrötchen, I have to make 2 pre-doughs the day before, and that is the part of the secret of this recipe, because good taste always needs time. So you cannot really bake good Franzbrötchen in one day. You have to be a little more patient than that. And I will start with these pre-doughs today and then continue with the remaining recipe tomorrow. So let's take a look at the ingredients, and for the quantities, please visit my blog post right here and see what you need and how much you need. And you can switch, if you look below the ingredient list, you can switch on a link between the metric system and the US customary system. Alright, so you will need some flour, some milk and some yeast for the first pre-dough, and for the second pre-dough you also need a little bit of flour, some salt and some milk too. So let's get started. I'll prepare the first pre-dough, and I will add a little bit of yeast. I don't need much for it, it's just a little bit, and you could as well do it with some sourdough. I've done that before and it's very nice, but I decided to do it this time with some yeast because a lot of people are still scared of sourdough and they don't do it, so I decided to make it easier for everyone, more comfortable for everyone. But if you have a sourdough starter in your fridge, you can totally use that instead of the yeast. And I just mix this together with a spoon. Okay, that's already it. And this has to go into the fridge for 20 hours. If you don't want to put it in the fridge and you have a cool room or a basement or something where it's cool, you can also put it there. But here in Texas, it has to be the fridge. So that was the first pre-dough. So the second pre-dough needs to be cooked. So I need a little saucepan, and I add the milk and the salt and also the flour, and I bring this to a boil. And the second pre-dough doesn't have to be in the fridge for 20 hours. It should be 4 hours at least, but it's okay if it's like 20 hours. I decided to make them, at the same time, so I'm done with that and can move on with my life. While I could also do this a little later. You can see now that this is thickening. And I can already turn down the heat. Okay, now I continue to stir this for another minute. You can see what it looks like now. So this has to cool a little bit before it goes into the fridge. And this one can go already. And I cover this with my wax fabric. And then I continue with this recipe tomorrow. My 2 pre-doughs have spent the night in the fridge and they are ready to be used, and I want to continue to bake my Franzbrötchen. So what I need is flour, milk, sugar, butter, dry yeast, some vanilla extract, 2 eggs, and of course my 2 pre-doughs. And I will mix the flour with the pre-dough. Number 1. And number 2. Then I also add the milk, the 2 eggs, and the vanilla. Lots of vanilla. Okay. And the yeast. And now I mix this for 5 minutes on slow and for an additional 5 minutes on medium. Five minutes on slow have passed, and I'm now slowly adding the butter. And it should be soft butter. And I increase the speed of the mixer to medium. Okay. And I'm also adding the sugar. So after the kneading, I'll take this out. It's quite soft. Maybe some of my ingredients were too warm. So the only ingredient that should be warm in this case is the butter that I added. Everything else should be cold, even the eggs. This is different from other doughs, but the reason for it is that we do not want to activate the yeast in here, okay? So it just needs a little more flour. And this goes back into the bowl and into the fridge for, let's say, 30 minutes. I think 30 minutes is reasonable. So for the next step I have to do already some preparations. So I have two sheets of parchment paper here, and on one of the parchment papers I drew a rectangle with a size of 25 times 20 centimeters that is in inches. What? Wrong one. It's 9 3/4 inches times 7.5 inch. So this is where I want to prepare the butter for this dough. So the dough that I'm making here is a puff pastry, and you can of course buy this, but it's better if you make it yourself. So the puff pastry basically is made with a dough that has a layer of butter in it, and this layer is folded several times so that these layers kind of multiply, and that creates these these layers, like if you have a croissant. And for that you need some butter. I have some Irish butter here, European butter, that nicely comes in this size. You probably don't have that. You can use it with a regular butter stick that we have here in America or wherever you live. Just you need some butter, and you have to place it on this rectangle. And you saw I turned this around so that the drawing is on the opposite side. I don't want to have the ink on my butter later. So what I'm doing is I'm cutting slices, and this butter has to be cold but still soft enough for me to cut it. Okay, so this goes here. And it's okay if there's a little bit of a gap. I will roll this out in a little bit, and that should fix that. Okay, now I put a second layer of parchment paper on top of it and use a rolling pin to roll this to one even layer of butter. So I turn this around so I can see my rectangle a little better, and I know where I have to roll it out a little more. And you see these gaps that have been there before. I'm closing these gaps here. And in some areas I'm way over the line, so I just move the butter where I need it. It looks quite good already. Okay, so this looks great, doesn't it? And this goes into the fridge now, and for, I would say, half an hour, maybe a little more, and then I'll take it out and use it with the dough. So see you in a little bit. Now it's time to work with the dough again. It has rested in the fridge and I've reduced the room temperature so I can work better with this dough. I really do not want to activate the yeast yet. So I want to roll this out now a little larger than the butter. I try to use as little flour as possible because this might make it more difficult to fold the dough later on if there's too much of the flour on top. So I try to shape it rectangular. And if you have problems to roll this dough, if it's pulling together again and again, then you need to let it rest for a little longer. So it's important for this dough to rest so you can properly roll it out. Okay, let's measure this. It should be a little larger than the butter, and it is. It's not important how thick this dough is, okay? So let's see, that's not too sticky on the bottom. Okay. Okay, let's get the butter. This will fit. So I'm removing the paper. I put this onto the dough and I'm removing the parchment paper from the other side. Okay. So what I have to do now is to bring this dough all the way. Oh, let's do it a little differently. Bring it on top of the butter while keeping the rectangular shape. And I want to entirely cover the butter, which is not happening here right now. Okay, that's good enough. All right, so now I'm starting to fold this dough. It's called Turieren in Germany. And there are different ways to do it and different numbers of layers that you want to achieve. In this case, for my Franzbrötchen, I want to achieve 6 layers of butter. So right now I have 1 layer of butter, right? And I'm now folding it once, which means I have 2 layers of butter. And I roll it out again. And you want to work fast here because otherwise the dough and the butter will get warm. You don't want this at this point. Okay. So now with the 2 layers of butter, I will now fold it into thirds. It's a little bit too far, like this. And now I have 6 layers of butter in this dough. Okay, I roll this again a little bit. And I put it on my parchment paper. Trying to make a nice little package. And I put it back into the fridge. So now it's time to get to the real making of the Franzbrötchen. Okay. So I will have to roll this out now, rather large. Okay, so now I have to put the filling on the top of this dough, and some people just use water, but you know me, I like it with a little bit of butter. So either way is correct. If you want to save on the fat, you can definitely use just water. Okay, so now I have prepared some sugar and cinnamon, and I mix these two things together. And again, you will find the quantities in the blog post. Okay, and now I'll put this on top. And you really want to be generous with this. You want to have a lot of cinnamon and sugar mix on here. Okay, now I have to roll this from the long end, and I have to roll this tight. Because the tighter it is, the more layers I will have in the end, and that's what I want. Okay, so now I have this long string, and now I have to cut this into slices of about 4 centimeters, which is, let me check, which is 1.5 inch. And there are 2 methods that I know of. So the first method would be just a regular, let me measure this, just a regular cut like this. And the other method that I know of is, is to make them in some sort of triangle shape. And the reason why I talk about the shape of how you cut this will come to you in a second. So for getting the correct shape of the Franzbrötchen, you have to use the handle of a wooden spoon and press it into the middle as if you wanted to cut it all the way through, but you stop at the right point. Oh, this is a little sticky. Okay. And this is how it goes onto the baking sheet. And this is my preferred shape. Everyone's doing these things different. And by the way, you see that some of the cinnamon sugar mix is coming out of the roll. Another way would be to mix the sugar and cinnamon with the butter and put this on top of the dough. But I decided to do it this way. And you see it gets this characteristic shape here when I press the handle in here. I put a little bit of flour on it so it won't stick that much. And you can see I got 12 pieces out of it, and I will cover these now and let them rise a little bit. Now I want to have the yeast activated, and I will increase the room temperature a little bit. I'm also preheating the oven to 200 degrees Celsius, which is 390 degrees Fahrenheit. The oven is hot, and the Franzbrötchen have increased somewhat in size, and I will now bake them for 20 minutes. I will bake them with steam, so you can either put a bowl with hot water into the oven, or like me, just spray the oven walls with some water. And yeah, so let's see how they turn out in the end. This is the first batch. The other batch is still in the oven, needs a little more. So they look really good. You can see the different layers here from the butter dough layers. I think the other baking sheet has even better shapes here, but they just need, I think, about 4 more minutes and they will be done. So I let these cool now, and then I will have them with a really good coffee. And from all the recipes that I could find on the internet about these Franzbrötchen, I think this is the one that turns out the best. If you wonder why I don't just use the store-bought puff pastry, the difference you probably notice, I put some sugar into the dough, also some vanilla. You don't have that in the store-bought puff pastry. You have other stuff in there. And if you're in doubt, if you want to go through all this trouble here, just take a moment, read the ingredient list on the puff pastry, and ask yourself, is this really what I want to eat? This is a very clean thing. It's lots of sugar, still not healthy, I agree. But in terms of ingredients, it is at least very clean and very delicious. And the consistency of these Franzbrötchen or French rolls, they are very soft and kind of moist, so they are not crisp or anything like that. So that's what you're going for. They're very soft, you can see it here. I can easily touch and move them so they're not crisp. Yeah, I hope you like this video. I know it's a lot of work and a lot of steps and it takes a lot of time, but if you're from Hamburg, you will not doubt that it is worth it. So take a weekend, try it out, enjoy it. It's the best thing from Hamburg. And I hope you subscribe, press the bell button, like, and stay tuned for the next video.